Get ready for the greatest roast of all time, the Roast of Tom Brady, a Netflix live event happening May 5th. Hosted by Kevin Hart, the 7-time world champion gets his cleats held to the fire by famous friends and frenemies on an unforgettable night where everything is fair game. Tune in on May 5th at 5 p.m. Pacific time for the Roast of Tom Brady, live only on Netflix.
Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and just like we did a scouting report on Ricky Pearsall, the Niners' first-round pick, we are now going into round number 2 of the 2024 NFL Draft and answering the question, is Renardo Green going to be a day one starter, or is he a polarizing reach in the second round for the San Francisco 49ers? Welcome into the show. Please leave a like on the video, and if you're listening on the audio platforms, leave a review and give us 5 stars. It helps in the freest form possible. And without further ado, let's dive into the San Francisco 49ers second round pick, 64th overall, cornerback out of Florida State, Renardo Green. And it would be incorrect if I didn't start this podcast episode, by saying when the pick was announced, Renardo Green, Florida State, I said, interesting. That was not the pick I would have done. It was not the cornerback I was expecting San Francisco to select at pick 64. Mike Sainrisfield from Michigan was one of my favorites, but it had already been picked by the Washington Commanders early in the second round. And Andrew Phillips from Kentucky, who later went to the Giants, I believe, was still on the board. So Renardo Green, pick 64. San Francisco traded back with the Kansas City Chiefs from the 63 to 64 to make this pick, allowing Kansas City to take Kingsley Suamataia, offensive lineman from BYU, in front of them. Also, the Ravens at pick 62 had taken Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle from Washington. Now, both of those players, Rosengarten and Suamataia, certainly have their drawbacks. Is Suamataia a guard? Is he a tackle? Is Roger Rosengarten strong enough? Does he have the play strength to be a tackle day one? But when you know who else was on the board, mainly Christian Haynes, guard from UConn, who just so happened to go to the Seattle Seahawks later on in the draft, that was a spot in the draft, second round. You go Pearsall round 1, that you expect San Francisco to want to address the offensive line. And when you know who's on the board and you've evaluated the players there, seeing Renardo Green's name pop up certainly didn't make many fans happy, which I believe led to Mel Kiper calling Green a reach. And it also led to Dane Brugler of The Athletic during the Live Athletic draft show say, it makes sense, but he's a polarizing player. I had him go in round 3 and round 4, which is where fans kind of fell on the matter themselves, thinking, okay, you could have gone offensive line. You could have gone cornerback here, which they did do, but could have gotten the right guy they liked in this spot. Instead, San Francisco picks their guy, which in every draft seems to be the most common occurrence. So who is Renardo Green? That is the question. Many fans don't know who he is. Many fans were unfamiliar with his game once San Francisco picked him and said, I don't know who this guy is. He's a bust. He stinks. He's a reach. And that's a super unfair way to evaluate a player, because the team didn't pick who you wanted or I wanted doesn't mean that player's bad, and it doesn't mean it wasn't a good pick. Now, obviously, time will tell, but the way to find out who these players can be, or the reason why San Francisco wanted to take Renardo Green over players me and you may have liked, is finding out who exactly Renardo Green is. And so, again, Renardo Green out of Florida State, a 5-year college player. He's around 6 foot. Some measurements may say 6 foot, some may say 5'11" and 5'8", but right around 5'11", or on the bottom end of 6 foot. He's 186 pounds. We'll dive into more of his height and his weight in a little bit, but 5-year college player, 6 foot, 186 pounds. He played inside at the nickel. He's also played free safety in college, but mainly played outside cornerback at Florida State. 75% of his snaps, and this is one of the reasons why San Francisco fell in love with him, and it's one of the reasons as to why Louis Riddick of ESPN called him the best press man cornerback in the draft, is because he played 75% of his snaps in press coverage while at Florida State. Diving into him as a player, very fluid hips and quick feet. He's someone who doesn't waste his steps. You'll find usually lower level cornerbacks or even young cornerbacks, they will waste their steps. They'll be a little clunky. They'll take too many steps, whereas Renardo Green is, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he's 1, 2, 3, bang to the ball. Now, we'll dive into how that can come back to bite him. But Renardo Green overall is a very smooth player. And if you're smooth like butter, shout out BTS. And you can also mirror that with being very physical. Now, again, sometimes over physical in how he plays. But Renardo Green does have the ability and the highlight tape, the film, the show. He can be fluid and also a very physical player, not just in coverage, but also as a tackler. And I am going to assume the more I talk about Renardo Green here on the show, you'll start to understand why San Francisco fell in love with him in the second round, whereas there were some players on the board still which probably had higher grades in the consensus. But again, the more we talk about Green, the more you'll see why they liked him in a Niners jersey at pick 64. At the end of the second round, mind you, it wasn't like he was pick 33, 64. Basically an early third round pick, so don't go too nuts in regards to, well, he was a third round consensus pick. It was basically a third round pick, just like Pearsall was basically a second round pick with a 5th-year option tied to his name. But back into Green as a player. Very physical, very fluid, good tackler and solid run defender. He is someone that is unafraid to get his hands dirty. And when talking about the cornerbacks in the draft, I did not mock Green to San Francisco, but of the cornerbacks we talked about during the pre-draft process, the two main ones playing nickel were going to be Mike Sainristil and Andrew Phillips. And while Sainristil was the much more refined prospect, better overall than Phillips was, one of the biggest knocks on Phillips was he's a great coverage player. He just doesn't tackle and he plays lighter than his weight would indicate, whereas Sainristil was worse in coverage than Phillips was, but really good tackler, wants to go lay somebody out. Renardo Green leans more into the Mike Sainristil category of run defending cornerback, a player that wants to tackle, willing to get his hands dirty, likes to light somebody up, and again, going back to being physical, sometimes to a point of getting there a little too soon. But overall, they can kind of coach him to not be as aggressive. Granted, it's San Francisco, and I'm sure they're going to like that out of him. But good tackler, good run defender. Going back to coverage, though, which I think is the main thing. If you can't cover, if you can't cover in college, you're probably not going to be able to cover in the NFL. And Renardo Green can tackle well, and he also is really good in press man coverage. This year, the entire college football realm, the entirety of the FBS, he ranked 17th with a 25.8 forced incompletion rate. That's not lockdown, but when you're talking about, I don't know how many schools there are in the FBS, but that's a lot of schools, every division, every conference, 10 to 12 teams per conference. You are inside the top 20 and just outside the top 15 in forced incompletion rate. You are among one of the best cornerbacks in all of college football. He is someone that was tied for the most forced incompletions in man coverage this year, and he only gave up 14 first downs throughout the entirety of last season. So again, I'm not going to say he'll walk onto the field day one. He'll start shutting down Debo and Brandon Ayuk, but you can see the traits, you can see the production through 5 years at Florida State that makes you say, I get why San Francisco picked Renardo Green in the second round over some higher consensus players like Chris Haynes from UConn, or maybe went in a different direction than draft need, tight end, offensive tackle. They went and got a guard later in round 3, but it wasn't as if fans weren't still clamoring for an offensive lineman. And so the more you read about Renardo Green, the picture becomes much clearer. And I think by the time we're done today, we are going to have a crystal clear projection of hope of what he could become in his next few years in San Francisco on his rookie contract. Renardo Green is a player that, in a way, kind of like Ricky Pearsall, San Francisco drafted Pearsall to be able to beat man coverage, to have another consistent weapon that can get open on a regular basis for Brock Purdy outside of Brandon Ayuk, whereas one of the issues with San Francisco's secondary last year was it was either you're going to have Isaiah Oliver out there who couldn't play outside and was a big nickel back that couldn't keep up with the smaller, fasty slot receivers, or you had Ambry Thomas who was too darn inconsistent and would get beat by larger receivers downfield, would get too hesitant, would play off man coverage because he was so scared to get beat over the top. And while there are some similarities in Green and Thomas's game, there is no fear in Renardo Green's play style. I think that's the big difference, where Ambry Thomas, who I think can be a number 4 cornerback on this team still, who I think almost all 32 teams in the NFL would value having in that room, because he's not terrible. He's just not one of the 3 best cornerbacks on a really good team like the Niners. And that's why you saw late in the season, mainly on Christmas Day, when San Francisco trotted out Jason Verrett against the Ravens, who ultimately got hurt again. But they were looking for replacement, knowing down the road Ambry Thomas wasn't going to be the guy to play outside cornerback. And then you saw against Kansas City in the Super Bowl, they elected to have Logan Ryan, who was called off a Disney cruise, come play nickelback and be their 3rd safety on the field, guarding Travis Kelce, who in that first half only had 1 catch for 1 yard, putting Lenore on the outside, giving San Francisco more flexibility. Again, there was fear in Ambry Thomas's eyes sometime. There was fear in the way he played. Go back to that Green Bay Packer game, gets beat over the top in the playoffs. The next about 2 or 3 drives, he's playing 10 yards off the guy in front of him, and many of those drives were potential game-winning drives for the Packers in which they failed to do so, but Ambry Thomas was being heavily targeted by Jordan Love and LaFleur because they knew he was a weak spot. Insert Renardo Green, who, when facing receivers like Malik Neighbors, who went inside the top 5, I believe, or top 6 this year, to the Giants. You have Brian Thomas Jr., who went to the Jacksonville Jaguars via a trade back in the first round. Someone that many Niner fans were saying, if Brandon Ayuk is traded to Jacksonville, pick Brian Thomas. And then his now teammate Ricky Pearsall, those 3 players, Green lined up against 60 times this past season. 60 coverage snaps, and I believe 2 or 3 games against those players over the course of his career, only allowed 5 catches, over 60 coverage snaps, a 28.7 quarterback rating, and 1 interception off of you-know-who, Jaden Daniels, the number 2 pick in this past year's draft by the Commanders. Renardo Green has and is proven to go up against the best talent in college football and flourish. He's not someone that blinks when the lights are bright. He isn't someone that blinks, when, the pressure's on. You put him in a big game against, again, two top 5 receivers. The second quarterback taken off the board this year, had it not been for Caleb Williams, could have been number 1 in most drafts to many. Renardo Green has that dog in him where Ambry Thomas simply has shown he does not, where I think of 3 years ago now in the NFC Championship game in Ambry Thomas's rookie season. Obviously, it's a big moment for him. He was horrible in the first couple of games he played, but you're playing the Rams, and they have Cooper Kupp and Odell Beckham Jr., and you and Emmanuel Mosley give up, I believe, over 100 receiving yards to Cooper Kupp and OBJ, allowing the Rams to stay in that game and ultimately go on to win the Super Bowl. And even look at Thomas this past year against Kansas City. The Kansas City Chiefs didn't have many weapons, Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce being the main two, but there's a reason why Thomas wasn't trusted to go out there and play. That's why you insert Green into this room, and he'll fight for a job, certainly, but he's a player that if he has to play in a pinch, if you aren't ready for him to be a day one starter, you're not going to fear that the moment's too big. You may be scared of that. He's a rookie, does he have the defense down? Is his technique refined? All that stuff, although I think his technique is pretty good. There are moments that, a young player can get put out of position. Renardo Green is at least not going to blink in big moments when he has to play against Marvin Harrison Jr. and Cooper Kupp and DK Metcalf and JSN in Seattle and Puka Nacua. He's going to face those challenges head on. And I think that's the difference over many in regards to Green and Thomas, who we're comparing here, is that Thomas is more of a conservative player, isn't very aggressive when it comes to his mentality. Renardo Green is like, let me go out there and rip someone's head off. And that's the difference in the type of players they are. And the production for Green is so much better than Ambry Thomas was. An 86.4 coverage grade this past year, ranked third amongst cornerbacks. And he had 18 pass breakups, 1 interception, again, off Jaden Daniels. In the last 2 seasons, he had 101 tackles and 5.5 tackle for losses. So you have a cornerback averaging 50 tackles and almost 2.5 tackles for loss the last 2 seasons. That's a player that can cover well. That's a player that also likes to get his hands dirty and wants to run defend. And you can talk about Fred Warner and adding Devondre Campbell and getting Malik Mustafa, who we'll talk about next week. This Niners team needed help in run defense, mainly containing the edges and mainly having players unafraid to take a body on one-on-one. That is Renardo Green, at least in the running game. And again, we've already dove into how good he is in coverage or how great he was in coverage in college. There's a lot of promise in what he can become with the Niners once he gets 1, 2, 3 years under his belt, where you're talking maybe a bona fide cornerback too, and in a perfect world or a high-end potential standard, I do think there is a lot of similarities to a player already in the building, and that is Charvarius Mooney Ward. Now, Mooney Ward's bigger, a little stronger, but he's also had 6-7 years in the NFL. Now, Mooney Ward was an undrafted free agent who got a massive contract by San Francisco after proving himself against with the Kansas City Chiefs. Green, second-round pick, gonna come in and hope to be an instant impact player, but you can see the way that he plays. Mooney Ward, being a press man coverage corner, flourishes in press man. Renardo Green, very similar. Mooney Ward, unafraid to get his hands dirty in the tackling game. And just like Mooney Ward at the NFL level, albeit more refined in his technique and refined learning to get his head around, Renardo Green having being a younger version of Mooney Ward, he's got 4.3 speed and he can shadow most routes. But there are times where he will struggle covering vertical routes downfield, and he isn't a player usually jamming somebody at the line of scrimmage. So he may see early bumps in his career, but mainly like Charvarius Ward, he can be a little grabby sometimes and over-aggressive in coverage. There was a time this past year that Mooney Ward, I think, had the highest or the second highest illegal contact calls in football. Renardo Green got called for 11 penalties the last 2 seasons. So 5 penalties over the course of 2 seasons, including 4 pass interference calls. He's a little grabby, a little over grabby. And for San Francisco, you have to ask yourself, are you willing to pay that price in an over-aggressive cornerback who might cost you a first down here or so, but is really good in coverage and could become something great and also be a good run defender when the time calls? Is that not already Charvarius Ward? That just screams Mooney Ward to me. And if you know the contract situations, and I'm not saying this is the reason as to why they picked a player like Green, but Mooney Ward's contract is up after this season, and they're going to have to choose between extending Mooney Ward or Diamador Lenore, one of those guys is likely not going to be here. While we all like them and want them to stay in San Francisco, the odds aren't in both of their favors in returning next season. So you get a guy like Green in the room in his rookie season, let him get his toes wet, dip in the pond of the NFL, cover some players here or there, and you hope by the end of the season he's replacing one of those players if you choose not to re-sign them. So I think the play style, like we talked about Pearsall and how he fits the system well, he kind of is very Brandon Ayuk-like coming out of college, having tested better than Brandon Ayuk. Renardo Green, at least play style, on the field and production-wise, is eerily similar to a player like Charvarius Mooney Ward. And if you've heard John Lynch talk pre-draft, post-draft, they've admitted that these 8 draft picks they chose, many of them were to build for the future and beyond this year, while also still trying to have an impact. So I don't want to speculate and dive into, what could become of Mooney Ward and Debo and Ayuk at the moment, but there's a real hint of the Niners were drafting in the first 2 rounds at least 2 replacements, and that would be for Debo, Ayuk, and Mooney Ward. I do want to shout out people in the comments. Bobo's in the comments. Tyler Helton. I'm a new subscriber as Kansas City fan. Look, I'm going to tell you, my friends, he's a big Niner fan. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Tyler. Brock Purdy is not a bust, needs good players around him. Well, he already has one of the best teams in football. But I will say, the more the merrier. Hence Ricky Pearsall, hence Jacob Cowing, hence Isaac Guerendo, and hence them not trading Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. I see you guys in the comments. I promise once we get through this scouting report, I will get to all the questions you have in the comments. I see you. I'm not forgetting you. Just hold on a little bit longer. Back to Renardo Green in regards to the Mooney Ward comp. Similar to Charvarius Ward, besides the penalties and being over-aggressive sometimes, you do wish that, and this was more of a problem this year for Mooney Ward, that he wasn't getting his head around fast enough. He was dropping INTs. Renardo Green is similar to that as well, where you wish he was a little faster getting his head around and converting PBUs and pass defenses and deflections into interceptions and getting the offense the ball back. So that stuff comes with time. The more you grow, the more veteran and the more snaps you get, you'll learn to get your head around faster, see the ball sooner, read the receiver's eyes, know the quarterbacks you're playing against, and you get coached up in a couple years. I think that will soon become, and have him or show him converting PBUs and pass deflections into interceptions and helping the offense in return. Going back to his stature, his height, his weight, which again, 6 foot-ish, maybe 6 foot, 5'11", around there, at a high end 5'11", low end 6 foot. He will get beat on fade routes in the back of the end zone. All of the touchdowns he allowed this past year were on back corner fade routes into the end zone. So that is very similar to Ambry Thomas, who is a smaller cornerback. And I always point to the Seattle game at home, and we saw early in the game on Thanksgiving against Seattle that Geno Smith and company wanted to target Ambry Thomas because they had DK Metcalf, who's a hulking man and is so much bigger than Ambry Thomas. That same concern might still be there for Green, at least coming into year one, until he can refine, at the line, jamming receivers and holding them and not letting them get to their routes. But I do see a lot of similarities in between Mooney Ward and Ambry Thomas, and I thankfully for both of the concerns, only one of those is a physical limitation. It's going to be tough for Green to guard 6'3", 6'4" receivers because he's just not 6'3", 6'4". He's 6 foot barely, and so guarding against players like Brian Thomas from LSU, who he did lock down, mind you, but Marvin Harrison Jr. and the taller receivers in the NFL could give him fits, and I'm sure we will see opposing offenses this year target that mainly with their bigger body receivers, and you hope that it's not a massive detriment to his growth, because It happens a few times. Shanahan loses trust in a game or so. It can affect your confidence. I hope Shanahan, and I'd like to think with Renardo Green being the highest secondary player ever picked under Kyle Shanahan, the highest cornerback ever picked by Kyle Shanahan in his time in San Francisco, the faith must be pretty high in a player like Renardo Green to have an instant impact. But that brings me to, okay, so he's great in press coverage, great in press man coverage, little shorter, but a lot of experience, and he doesn't blink against the best competition. What are the weaknesses? Obviously talked about his stature, being smaller, a little too grabby, doesn't get his head around too much. There may be some of that fear like Ambry Thomas, and you hope it isn't there, but he's not going to jam players at the line of scrimmage, and so he's going to have to guard his butt off. He's not going to, he's not going to jam DK, jam JSN in the slot. He's not that kind of player, so he's going to have to rely on the tools. And thankfully he has 4.3 speed, but his 4.3 speed can be a little bit deceptive. We'll dive into Isaac Guerendo in a few weeks. Isaac Guerendo has 4.3 speed. He takes a little bit to get going. Renardo Green's 4.3 speed, similar to Guerendo, is that straight line receivers that are burners, he has a hard time guarding them. Now, is he bad against them? No, but that is a weakness of him. Now, that said, towards the sideline, slants over the middle, he has the speed to make up a misstep or so. And thankfully, like we already talked about, he doesn't miss many steps and is very fluid in his coverage. But that said, where does he fit in the Niners cornerback room? Because as of now, if you want to define him as an outside cornerback, San Francisco still has one nickelback in the room. Now, there is nickelback flexibility with players like Chase Lucas, and Samuel Womack is more of an outside cornerback. They don't view him as a nickelback, but where is Renardo Green's role? Do you want him playing outside? And thankfully, with the additions of players like Isaac Yiadom and Ambry Thomas and Darrell Luter both already being in the building, it does give them the flexibility to move players inside and outside to have these matchups with opposing offenses, which is one of the reasons as to why I was saying go get Mike Sainristil, go get Andrew Phillips, go get a Tyke Smith who can play nickel, who went to the Buccaneers, I think. It's just, you need to have the ability to not rely on one player in one role, especially in a cornerback room where you've had one hole over the course of the past 3 seasons, and Mooney Ward's great, bona fide starter. Lenore, really good player, definitive starter, but where? Is Yiadom a starter? Really good last year for the Saints, but on a 1-year contract. You want to build continuity in that room. I'm someone who believes that your best lineup might be Green and Yiadom on the outside, with Lenore playing inside and Mooney Ward on the outside opposite those two cornerbacks, simply because then you can move people around. Yiadom comes in on base downs if you want to. You can move Lenore to the outside if needed based on matchups. You can move Green to the inside on matchups. And if you want to get crazy and nutty, you can have Green play free safety and be this thumping, smaller player, mind you, but a really good coverage and run defending free safety if needed. So Green gives you 3 position flexibility, albeit I would like to push him towards the outside and keep him there, knowing that's probably where he's going to play the majority of his career. But you can bring it back to the height issue. When you're 5'11", barely 6 foot, you might be built to play nickel, and knowing how feisty they like Lenore playing nickel and even playing on the outside, I don't know if San Francisco truly has a position designed for a player like Renardo Green, who has Mooney Ward play style comparisons, but has the height of a true nickelback in the NFL. So he'll have to kind of find his niche, but if all things were perfect and we can project a, amazing scenario for Renardo Green, it would be the opposite outside cornerback between Lenore and Mooney Ward. So what is the expectation for him? Is the expectation for Mooney Ward, for Renardo Green, to come in and be a day one starter? Well, I have to ask you that. Would or should Renardo Green be a day one starter for this team? Obviously, OTAs haven't began yet. Obviously, training camp is still, a month away. And preseason, we haven't even seen live reps yet. But just based on paper, the odds San Francisco carries 6 cornerbacks is pretty high. Well, I can already write down 4 or 5 of them, right? You have Mooney Ward, he's a lock. Lenore's a lock. Isaac Yadom's probably a lock. Renardo Green is a definitive lock. Then that leaves players like Rock Ya-Sin, who I don't love very much, but he's in the room now. It leaves you Samuel Womack, who got benched last year and is kind of on the outs on the roster. Then that gives you Darrell Luter Jr., who never got a chance coming into year 1. Now he's in year 2. He could be an outside option for you. I think Luter's a lock. So now you got 5 guys in that room ready to go. And you have Ambry Thomas, who has started a handful of games the past few seasons for this team. You have Rock Ya-Sin. You have Samuel Womack. And you have Chase Lucas, where only 2 of those players truly give you, 3 of those players, if you want to add Rock Ya-Sin in there, give you true special team flexibility. That 6th cornerback role is kind of the only one up for grabs, in my opinion. And of the ones we've already locked into place of, you're probably going to make this team, thankfully, with Green now in the room, he's the only other guy besides Lenore that can play nickel, unless they go the Chase Lucas route and give themselves 3 cornerbacks that could play nickel and special teams, which, if that's the case, of the players in that room, there's 1 starting position open, and I think right now it's kind of a 4-way fight for that role, with Yadom being the leader, obviously a veteran player coming from New Orleans this past season. Then you have Green, 2nd-round pick. He'll get his fair shot out there. Then you have Ambry Thomas, who was a starter last year for the team. And you have Darrell Luter Jr., who they want to have be out there on reps and actually get on the field a lot, because he didn't get much time last season. So I think it's a 4-way fight to be the opposite starter on the outside next to Lenore and opposite Mooney Ward. But the only opened position on this team really is that 6th cornerback slot. And I can argue 3 or 4 of the other players, they're fighting for that starting job. So the competition on the outside is going to be ferocious. It'll be fun to watch. And I do think Green having the flexibility to play on the inside gives San Francisco, or at least gives him, a better option or a chance in that race to start over a player like Yadom, Ambry Thomas, and Darrell Luter Jr. So I do think, again, kind of like Pearsall, while there's a lot of room to grow and there's things to be done and there's production on the field that we had to see, Pearsall and Green, the first 2 picks of the NFL draft for San Francisco, could be day 1 impact players for the San Francisco 49ers. And I think Green, even over Pearsall, like, the cornerback room is crowded, not loaded. The receiver room is loaded and now also crowded. So I think Green, even over Pearsall, has a better chance to impact day 1, which, if you told me that a 1st-round pick wouldn't be getting, I don't want to say the reps, but would be getting outshadowed potentially in year 1 by a 2nd-round player, I would have said, that doesn't seem right. That's not how this is supposed to work. But the way San Francisco's operated, I would not be shocked if come day 1, Green's a starter and Pearsall is the 4th receiver getting minimal reps in the offense. Now, that said, I think Pearsall and Green can both start day 1 and flourish with the team, Pearsall being in the slot and Green playing outside or nickelback. But if I was a Niners and the fan base, which we are, I'd be really excited for what Green can become, simply because he has traits that good run defender, really good in press man coverage, and just gives you flexibility in which you once didn't have, but also just screams dog, where this team, they wanted to get faster and they wanted to add more dogs. And I think on offense and defense, they did both of those things. And, the first 2 picks in the draft are usually the statement picks of, we're going to have an amazing season. While I get the positional value wasn't always there for some fans. You wanted the offensive lineman. You wanted the cornerback earlier, Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, who went to Philadelphia. I think the first 2 picks by San Francisco were overall statement picks of, these guys could play day 1. one of these guys, more so than the other, could start day one. And I think when you're talking about, getting in, the playoffs and going back to the Super Bowl, it's moves like this that can impact you year one, but also continue and keep your window open over the course of the next 3-4 seasons once you pay Brock Purdy next year and you have to say goodbye to certain players. So Renardo Green, to me, while I'm not going to lie to you, when it came across, I was like, well, that's disappointing. The more I dove into his tape, and while there is some concerns, overall, loved what I saw. The idea of him being polarizing, I didn't get it. Yes, there are some concerns in regards to getting his head around and being grabby. Like, there's going to be a couple plays this year, and I can guarantee you this, where it's 3rd and 7, your team's leading by 3 points, and the ball gets thrown his way. You think the game is won, and all of a sudden, here comes a flag. Holding Renardo Green on the San Francisco 49ers, and we all say, are you serious? That's just kind of what you have to live with if you are the Niners with a player like Green. But hopefully, if all is said and done and they can coach the grabbiness out of him and control the aggressiveness, there's a really good player. And I mean, not just good, like really good coverage player in Renardo Green now on the San Francisco 49ers depth chart. And that's really all I have to say about Green. I didn't give my draft grade for Ricky Pearsall, but I will do it now. And I will also tell you my draft grade for Renardo Green. And I know I just talked him up. I know I just told you how much I like the pick. And while there are some areas I wish he would improve upon, I gave Pearsall's pick a B+. And again, I know I just talked him up for the last 35 minutes, but I gave the Green pick a C+ simply because of the positional value that was there, and because I would have rather have had Chris Haynes, but time will tell. That's not a knock on Green the player, it's just at that point in time, 2nd round pick, I do think there was more valuable players, better players on the board, but when you see the potential in Green, it certainly makes you want to change that draft grade from a C+ to a B+ if he can reach his potential. Let me dive into the comments here, because let's talk about Bobo, who's always in the comments, always in the chat. Bobo, I appreciate you so much. Love the dog pick. My dog's behind me sleeping right now. Hopefully you can't hear him snoring. His name is Stanley, by the way. But here's Bobo's question. With the expected holdout of Ayuk, and if Pearsall does fantastic in training camp, do you see Ayuk being traded before the season? Flat out no. If San Francisco wants to preach and tell us that we're all in for 1 year, what you don't do is you don't let the NFL draft pass you by, or you can likely get the highest and best value for a player like Brandon Ayuk. Even if it was a high-end 2nd round pick, you don't then trade that player after you've drafted and all the picks are gone, which you can no longer find instant impact players that are likely cheap on a roster in exchange for Ayuk. You don't let that time pass you by, because then you put yourself in a bad place of, receiver needy teams already have their weapons. The San Francisco, which I don't think they feel this way, but if they do, they're stuck with Ayuk for a year, but I believe they want to pay him. They're going to pay him. If anybody's gone, it's going to be Deebo Samuel in 1 year's time. But this leads me to another question by Fluffy Ninja, who's always a listener and always a watcher. Thank you so much, Fluffy Ninja. Says, what did you think of John Lynch today on the Pat McAfee show? And if you watched that, John Lynch, one of the quotes he said was, I want to keep this team together. That's my goal. Now, as to what extent he means the team, does he mean re-signing everybody? Does he mean, bringing back Ayuk and then bringing back Lenore and Mooney Ward and Hufanga, then letting someone like Deebo go? Sure. I think John Lynch, and it is in the best interest of the San Francisco 49ers to re-sign Brandon Ayuk post-June 2nd, carry over as much cap possible as you can, because, again, that cap carries over into next year, and you hope You pray to the football gods, Roger Goodell, John Madden, whoever's out there, raise that salary cap again, because if that cap goes up, it gives you more flexibility to keep the stars, your superstars on the team, and your window open. And it also makes re-signing Brock Purdy and the rest of the herd out there you have to bring back after the season not hurt your pocketbook that bad. So I think San Francisco, I know Mike Silver would say it's the last dance. I am someone that believes it's potentially the last dance. I won't go as hard as Mike Silver would, but I certainly understand where he's coming from. But I do think that San Francisco, they view this as kind of an influx year. We're going to go all in, but next year, nothing is promised via who could be gone or return, which we saw this year. Kyle Juszczyk had to restructure his deal. Fred Warner restructured. George Kittle restructured. And we saw Eric Armstead get cut on a post-June 1st designation because this team couldn't afford to pay everybody they wanted to pay while also getting better in the process. So there's going to be some harder moves that come up. I am someone who respected Eric Armstead a ton, but didn't hurt too bad to let him go and walk out the building, like letting a Debo or a Kittle or an Ayuk would, or even a Mooney Ward, who is, I think, much more important to this team than Eric Armstead was. It would hurt watching them leave. But going back to Renardo Green for a hot second, I do think the addition of Green now gives you two, if Green does translate to the NFL, like his college tape and film and production would, allude to him doing. You add Mooney Ward and Green to the room, and you now have two really good press man coverage cornerbacks, similar to Pearsall, where good separator, going to get open with Ayuk, hopefully consistently. You give this defense that is going to go back to a read and react, go get the quarterback, and you have to play really good man coverage to allow your pass rush to get home. Go back to 2019. This team was playing a lot of press man coverage with Robert Saleh, Emmanuel Mosley, and Richard Sherman. That's one thing that has been lacking for a variety of reasons the past few years. Obviously, Steve Wilkes was here last year. Emmanuel Mosley being hurt 2 years ago. They haven't really had a consistent, group in that secondary starting every single week outside of the Ambry Thomas stretches of time in which he's played. So, and even then, he is no press man coverage corner. You get two press man coverage corners that can excel in the NFL and guard guys one-on-one and play man coverage. You're only going to give your edge rushing group, which you've loaded up on this year, Nick Bosa, Malik Collins, Javon Hargrave, Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos, and others, you're going to give them more time to get home. And all that does is it allows your defense to flourish. You get home sacks, and you can bring the quarterback down, which puts your defense in better positions to succeed and get off the field sooner. So it's not just a cornerback, we're better, great. Nickel flexibility, it's no, now you have two press man coverage corners that can actually, guard two receivers, one-on-one, man-on-man coverage, and hopefully guard them long enough and shadow routes long enough to give Nick Bosa time to get home and get back to his defensive player of the year ways, and give players like Javon Hargrave and Leonard Floyd time to get home to the quarterback and hopefully improve the pressure rate, which was such a horrible thing last year for San Francisco when they struggled. If you can't get home to the quarterback and you can't cover, man-to-man, you're going to get beat. Hence why you saw San Francisco struggle against the Packers and the Lions and at times the Bengals and the Vikings. Now they hopefully have two bodies in that cornerback room to give the pass rush more time to get home. I want to keep going on in regards to John Lynch. I thought, John Lynch today, and I don't want to dive too much into it because it wasn't the point of the show, but I thought John Lynch today was fantastic on the Pat McAfee show. I thought there's a reason why he was calling games and doing media for so long, but learning that, he cold called Kyle Shanahan saying, hey, if you want a GM, think of me. Now, he did say, I don't know if I'll take it, but then to learn that he took that job on the flight back and didn't even tell his wife, just tells you how committed to this team he is. how committed to winning he is. But also, I've been in that room with John Lynch on various occasions, not too much, but at sometimes. You can tell when a GM does and doesn't care. You can tell when a GM is so detached from the team itself. Jerry Jones, although his hands are everywhere in Dallas, very detached from the reality of the day-to-day and what the players are going through. John Lynch is very much attached to this team, being in meetings, being in, pregame meetings and, film room meetings, and talking about how he has his rituals of, standing up on defense and sitting down when the offense is on the field. So John Lynch is very much involved, not just with, player personnel decisions and bringing in scouts and, making and drafting prospects. He's also involved a little bit, at least in, in those day-to-day operations of the team. You go to any practice, John Lynch is out there watching the team, talking to Kyle Shanahan, and it's very much a collaborative effort between those two. Now, obviously, there's a hierarchy there, but John Lynch isn't some hovering GM, making these decisions while so detached from what's actually happening on the football field. Eric Soley in the comments says, I like Darrell Luter Jr. a lot. Eric, I will tell you this for a bona fide fact. So is San Francisco. They still like Darrell Luter Jr. a lot. I think last year, despite being a 5th-round pick, I think they talked to him like 5 times before the draft. So he is somebody they were really tied to before last year's draft. And I think, I wouldn't say he was going to be a day one player or an instant starter last year, obviously, but, not having an off season to work with because of the injuries he had, I think there was a chance he was at least going to get a look to play more last season on the outside, and obviously injuries caught up to him, but he was a player, and I've talked about it plenty of times, made a touchdown-saving tackle on Thanksgiving, playing special teams, so there is a player in him somewhere. Now, of that cornerback group we already talked about playing on the outside, I think he is the last man on that totem pole, but I do think he has traits San Francisco likes, being a larger, taller cornerback, that if there are some issues with Renardo Green and his near 6-foot stature and under 190 pounds weight and play strength, Luter Jr. could be another flavor in that room that could give San Francisco more options. Fluffy Ninja here says, and I think Fluffy, you speak for a lot of Niner fans out there, saying, my draft crush was Cooper DeJean. It hurts to see him go to Philadelphia. Yeah, I screamed to the high heavens, why do we keep letting Howie Roseman get away with this? It feels like every year he gets lucky, and then you realize the Washington Commanders, of all teams, traded back with the Eagles to take Cooper DeJean, or to allow Philadelphia to take Cooper DeJean. So, baffling moves by many teams, maybe even including San Francisco, if Pearsall doesn't hit like we hope he does. But, yeah. And I don't know if you guys are on Twitter very much, but was I the only person that saw that a lot of people on Twitter had announced the pick as Cooper DeJean? I don't follow Dov Kleiman for a variety of reasons, or I have him muted for a variety of reasons, but there were other players or other people in the community of Niner content creators that said Cooper DeJean was the pick. And I was like, well, that's cool, great. Cooper DeJean makes sense. And then I saw it was Pearsall, and I was like, well, someone's getting in trouble. Someone's getting fired. Then you see the rumor out there that San Francisco may have leaked the pick to ward out some rats and leakers in the building. Now, who knows if that's the case, but it does open a door for conversation, because there are a lot of people, a lot of top-end content creators that said, Cooper DeJean's the pick, and it was like, wait a minute. No, it's not. So I'm sure there were a little unfair teases by that, because we all said, it's Cooper DeJean, Ricky Pearsall, and I love Pearsall, but there was this confusion of what just happened? who did we actually take? Because I'm really confused now. But Dumpster Fire Dan agrees with Fluffy Ninja, saying, I was upset too, but Cooper dropped really far. There's a reason why these players drop. Cooper is a master of none right now. I can see where you get that. Cooper DeJean, jack of all trades for sure. Give me 1 second, and I can find my scouting report on Cooper DeJean in my phone. But let me see if I can find it really fast, because Cooper DeJean was a player that I didn't think would be there at 31. Lo and behold, in the early 40s or late 30s, he was a player that probably the second best secondary player, cornerback / safety on the board in the draft. Clear-cut safety one, if you want to call him a safety. I think a cornerback, nickelback, number 1 or 2 in the draft, right behind Quinyon Mitchell, and maybe a Mike Sainristil. But Cooper DeJean is a player that I was not expecting to be on the board, past 26 to Green Bay. And I was like, holy, what's going on with Cooper DeJean? But I have him here. He's 6 foot, 203 pounds, really good tackler, excellent tackler and run defender, has good speed, doesn't have great lateral agility, better in zone coverage than man coverage, but a pretty good man coverage corner that can play cornerback in the NFL. Excellent ball skills, really good in press coverage. He will get inside a receiver's shoulder pads at the line of scrimmage. Flexibility certainly helps, playing nickel, playing safety. I have in my notes, think Jalen Ramsey with the Rams, or in a crazy world, think Kyle Hamilton with the Ravens. Obviously, that being the high-end potential that he carries. And he can lock down tight ends. I do think Philadelphia had a really good draft. And Philadelphia is in a weird place because we don't really know who Jalen Hurts is. Now, Hurts, 2 pretty good years, but they were really bad towards the end of last season, and I think they'll bounce back. They needed to retool that team a lot. When you get the 2 best cornerback / safety tandem in the draft in a room that has an aging Darius Slay and a returning Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and a pretty much overall bad James Bradbury, you've put yourself in a position to revitalize your defense, get younger, get stronger. And they also watched players retire. Fletcher Cox now retired. They brought in, I think, Bryce Huff from the Jets. And I think offensively, you've re-signed A.J. Brown. You signed Devontae Parker, and you've re-signed Devontae Smith. And you have Dallas Goedert still, and you brought in Saquon Barkley. There is going to be a point in time this year where Philadelphia is likely ranked higher on power rankings than San Francisco. But there are a lot of questions in regards to who Jalen Hurts still is. Mainly because you lose to the Chiefs 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, which is far too common for Niner fans, unfortunately. But then you lose to Baker Mayfield and the Bucs last year. And you also lost Jason Kelce. So, who are you going to be, and what is that team's identity going to be this year? But overall, I do think even if Cooper DeJean doesn't become Kyle Hamilton, Jalen Ramsey, he at least becomes an instant nickelback for you, next to Darius Slay, next to Quinyon Mitchell, and you just go, Howie Roseman, you dirty dog. How do you keep getting away with this stuff? But I think overall that the Niners, going back to our team, the Niners, I think their first 2 picks, Ricky Pearsall and Renardo Green, are 2 capable, 2 impactful players in year 1 of their careers. I don't think this was a punt and hope in year 2 they can play. This was a no in year 1. They should be able to have an impact, and hopefully, if everything goes well, they should be able to start at a certain point. And maybe if you want to delve into conspiracies, maybe Pearsall and Renardo Green are both replacements for star players on this team, with Pearsall maybe being an Ayuk / Debo replacement. I lean towards Debo. And also Green being that maybe Mooney Ward or Lenore replacement on the defensive side of things. But what did you think of the Renardo Green pick? Did you learn from the show into who he is as a player? Did you like the pick? Did you want somebody else? Did you want Christian Haynes from UConn? Or you're screaming, why did we trade back with Kansas City? Or are you okay with the player in which San Francisco picked at 64 in the second round? And do you now believe, after watching the show and listening, that Renardo Green could be an instant impact player for this team and could start in year one if all things go well and he stays injury free? Obviously, a little grabby, but a great tackler. Someone that has shown to lock down some of the best receivers in his own draft class. So the future's very bright for Green. Just has to keep grinding. Don't be as grabby and learn from a player like Mooney Ward, who he has a lot of similarities with. But overall, I do like Renardo Green, especially after learning more about who he was as a person, as a player, and hearing this one statement from him, which doesn't mean much, but I think it just buys in and sells to you and myself who he is as a player, saying, in regards to playing with the Niners, they fit me. They play like some savages. They play like some dogs, meaning I'm a savage. I'm a dog. And Renardo Green is going to want to back that up come OTAs, come minicamp, come training camp, and come that number 2 outside cornerback or nickelback competition, because right now this team wants some dogs, and if Renardo Green can bring some more dog to an already loaded and stacked defense, San Francisco's in for a wild and hopefully deep playoff run and an improved secondary and defense this upcoming season, going back to a Seattle-style scheme, which would already benefit them a lot. They can get Dre Greenlaw healthy and back, and Hufanga back healthy. A lot of things can happen. A lot of good things can happen for this team where everything has to go right, but I don't want fans to get discouraged. The picks that were made this year were made for now and the future, not made just for the future, and that includes Pearsall and Renardo Green. I hope you liked the show today. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday evening or a Friday morning when you're listening to the show on the audio platforms. I want to kindly ask you to follow us on social media at 49ers_access is the Twitter or X. 49ers.access is the Instagram. Please leave a like, share, leave a review, give us 5 stars. Tell us what you think of the 49ers draft class so far. We will dive into round 3 pick Dominic Mooney next week as we continue to scout every single draft pick of the 2024 San Francisco 49ers NFL draft class, and want to ask you kindly to use our promo code at SeatGeek.com. I ask you to leave likes and reviews and help us reach our 1,000 subscriber goal in the near future. But also, I want to help you as well and give you $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek.com using our promo code 49ERSAccess, 49ERSACCESS. Go to a baseball game, go to an NBA playoff game, go lock in, go pre-buy some NFL tickets using that promo code and save yourself $20 off. It'll at least pay for part of your parking or maybe a beer on me. But again, thank you for watching and listening. And until next time, my name is Sterling Bennett. This has been the 49er Access Podcast, and stay faithful.